with Boston Photographer. Hope you're doing okay. Think you'll like today's video. We're going to talk about ISO and try to get you to understand and not be afraid of using ISO. Anyhow, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and let's get started a little bit. If you're a beginner, and I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you've not been taking photography as a hobby for very long, but one thing to look at with photography, everything about photography has to deal with how we work with the light. Everything's light. Our aperture, the opens and closes, as it closes, less light, as it opens, more light. And that controls our depth of field. Our shutter, whether the shutter's going shh, shh, or that controls how much light is coming into the lens. And we have ISO, which is a sensitivity to light, and we can change our ISO to let more light in. If you take a picture and it's a little dark and you can't get what you want with your aperture or slowing down your shutter speed, the next step, without using a flash, is let's up our ISO and see if we can get a good photograph. Now, your number one objective is always to get a good photograph. Get the picture, and we'll have to sort the rest of it out. One thing is, you probably know about ISO, you want to keep it as low as possible because the picture is crisper, cleaner, less noise, and you've probably seen that in lots of other videos us talking about that. But I want to try to give you a little bit of a real world look to ISO and how you would use it in the field or in the studio. So let's take, you have auto ISO and you have your normal set ISO. Like if you set your camera at 100 ISO or 400 ISO, it's not going to change unless you put it on auto. Now, each setting has advantages and disadvantages. If you are in an environment that is going to be changing, anything that's not regular, anything that's changing, auto ISO is a good idea, because no matter how good you think you are, and there's lots of people out there that think, oh, I only shoot, I never use auto ISO because it's an automatic setting. It's your fault, dude. If you have changing situations, auto ISO can be your friend. Tons and tons and tons of wildlife photographers, for example, they're shooting manual mode, but they shoot auto ISO because their lens is following a bird or an animal. And just like you can walk out in your backyard here in a minute after you watch my video, and you can do the same thing. If you point your camera, say that bird or whatever is in the shade, it may show to be very, very dark, or it may show, well, alright, it's probably going to show very, very dark. Let's just leave it at that. It's going to show very, very dark. Alright, you will have to make, if you had manual ISO, you're going to have to make an adjustment to boost up the light. But what if that bird hops out a little further into a brighter spot, or it hops out into the sun? Just a matter of inches. Remember, you're trying to concentrate on a squirrel or a rabbit or a bird or whatever it is. Just a matter of a few inches, you can go from 1500 or 2000 ISO to ISO 100. Alright, you're going, wow. I'm talking about just a few inches. You can't adjust that fast and try to keep focus on that animal or that bird. Don't care how good you think you are. Alright, and how you can do this, let's go back to our camera just for a minute. As you grow with your photography, the way you're going to find out stuff like this, and don't be afraid. Please don't be afraid to jump over, put it on M, put it on manual, and put your camera on auto ISO. And say if you're shooting a rabbit or something, put it like on F8 and maybe 1/500th of a second if the animal's hopping around. Just set it, okay? Then when you're in manual mode and you're looking through your lens, every manufacturer, every camera I know of, and when you are in manual mode, is going to show some kind of little bar. And sometimes, like on the newer Nikons, not this one, but on the newer Nikons, it'll actually even tell you what ISO you're pointing at. All right, so use this meter that's in your camera. Okay, so look through, look at that rabbit, look at that squirrel, the bird, whatever, and look at that bar. If it's left of center, you know you're a little dark. You may have to make an adjustment. If it's to the right of the center, it's a little bright. So you're going to have to kick up shutter speed, or you're going to have to make some kind of adjustment, lower your ISO. This is how you can tell what a wildlife photographer might see. So imagine, point at a tree, walk outside here in a minute, point at a tree or whatever, a shady spot, and just gradually move your camera to a brighter light and watch that little meter move. And like I said, some cameras, one of my newer Nikons in there actually tells you what ISO you're jumping from. This is the reason we use auto ISO. You know, I'm real big on doing location portraits. And there's another thing, if you're out in a changing environment, say you got sunlight and you're going from sunlight to shade, or something that's changing, auto ISO can be really good. If you got a model under a tree and she's kind of dark or whatever, you know, I'll use flash then to make sure she's lit up sufficiently. But ISO can change so drastically within just a few feet, a few inches even. And you either have to be able to be good enough to make adjustments on the fly, and you're guessing most of the time anyhow. Your camera's not guessing with auto ISO. I'll tell you right now though, since we're talking about shooting outside here for a minute, if you're shooting outside and you have sunlight, you also have shadow. And if you're under trees, if you're in a mottled light situation, that is the hardest thing in the world for your camera to figure out. So if you're shooting a model, for example, on a sunny day and the light's coming down through the trees, you snap and your picture, and it's usually going to go to the dark. Almost every time it's going to go to the dark, and you're going, oh my cow, that's way too dark. And you try bumping up your ISO, and no matter what you shoot, it's still going to the dark. Your camera does not know what you're shooting at, okay? It just has a certain plane of gray or whatever that it adjusts from. Mottled light is really tough. So if you're shooting a model or a portrait in mottled light, I would shoot a flash, unless there are some exceptions. But like I said, if you have this ever-changing light, it's very hard on the camera. It's very hard on you as a photographer. Okay, so that's why people use auto ISO, is to have a jump on what you're going to be taking a picture of. The camera's going to give its best guess of wherever that lens is pointing, and you concentrate on your job, taking that picture of the person or the rabbit or the squirrel or the bird. Let the camera do the rest. Now, for manual ISO, here's where manual ISO can be really good. When you have a constant environment, say you're in a studio, you got your lights set, or outside you have high clouds or a partially cloudy day, or it's hazy, but the light is even wherever you go. It's not changing, or it's not changing very much. This is when you can fine-tune your manual ISO, guys. If you're shooting portraits, say you're outside, you're shooting portraits and you got a hazy day or high clouds, but the light is diffused and it's even, this is the time to take those precious pictures. And you can turn that ISO down to 100, or if it's maybe late in the evening, you might put it on 400 or even 800 or something like that. But you're in a constant environment. Every shot is going to reproduce itself probably equally. So now you can take those precious pictures in the optimum situation. And not to mention, if you got diffused light, you have no glare, all the colors around you pop. The greens are green, the reds are red, the colors pop, and we'll talk about that maybe on another video. But you're in the best possible situation. Manual ISO, you want manual ISO when things are not changing. If you're going to be in one place, you're going to be under one tree, under one building, in the studio, and you got your backdrops and your lighting's not going to change, you can tweak that ISO to perfection. Understand? But if the sun popped out, all of a sudden I would jump probably to auto ISO again to help with the change. And I never like to shoot in direct sunlight anyhow. It's really can be difficult, and we'll talk about that on another video. But ISO, don't be afraid to go into your manual settings. Don't be afraid to play with your ISO. I would, on most cameras, what I would call usable, how high you can go. If you shoot at that tree at 5 o'clock in the evening or whatever, and it says ISO 20,000 or something like that, that's dark. And whatever you do to try to lighten that picture up, the picture's probably going to be grainy. Okay, so you need to, in your mind, you need to keep a certain ISO ceiling in your head. And the only way you're going to find that out, guys, is also using your camera. If you take a picture and it's ISO 6400, well, take that picture and then go look at it on your computer and see, crop it in, zoom it in and out, and see if you see the grain. I've shot lots of usable 6400 ISO photos. Where you usually see the grain is when you got a solid or a dark background. You can start to see it really easy. So look for that. If your camera's showing noise, well, go down to ISO 3000. All right, take a picture, then go in and look at it on your computer, zoom it in and out, and see if it's grainy. See how much you got to crop it before you see any grain. Okay, so it's really, really easy to do. Learn your camera. The number one thing, and we'll get into this on another video, the number one thing with your camera is learn your camera, take the best possible photo in your camera, and rely less on your editing. Okay, you understand? It's easier to edit if you've done your homework with your camera. You don't have to try to turn a Shetland pony into a thoroughbred. Your camera may have took that thoroughbred shot, and all you got to do is straighten it up and, add a little light or what, just something simple. So anyhow, go out and play with your ISO on your camera and see what you get. I hope what I've told you today will make a little bit of sense. I'm trying to tell you how to use your ISO and when to use your ISO. But just remember, If you have a changing environment, if you're shooting wildlife especially, anything that's moving, and you're going from shadow to shade and back to shadow and things like that, auto ISO is usually going to produce the best results. If you have a constant environment, you can tweak that ISO. You can put it on manual and you can go down to 100 or ISO 220 or whatever it is, and you can get that perfect, awesome shot. Okay? So think about that. And you guys have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Okay? Take care. So bye-bye.